Hey, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining our elementary group here. I'm going to share my screen with you guys. Just give me a second. Bear with me just a second. Okay, so hopefully my screen is, you guys are able to see my screen.
Yep, I can see it.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Well, welcome. Thank you so much again for joining me. And today we'll be talking a little bit about some just tips and tricks on STEM outreach for elementary school activities. So first and foremost, I just kind of wanted to talk to you guys about what we already have established. So as you've heard previously, we have within our ITE website some STEM activities already done. These projects were established with different members of ITE, and we kind of made them all look the same. And so, as Karen was mentioning, it's very hard to find transportation specific STEM outreach projects. So, we've made it very easy for you. So, if you're interested in going out to elementary schools and doing some of the STEM outreach, there's no reason for you to reinvent the wheel. Please make sure you go into our website and look through the elementary activities. I've kind of circled that. It's very easy to find within our website, and there's different ones that you can choose from. It just makes it easier if you choose some of the pre-established projects to go with that. So
How do you get to that point?
so if you
Like,
go into the website here, let me just pull it up real quick and go through it with you guys. So if you just Google ITE STEM, it'll basically bring you to this page over here. And so it's under the technical resources within the ITE website. And in there, you'll see that it's done a pre-K, elementary, middle school, high school. So that you can kind of click on it, and that's where it'll bring you directly to that. And then once you're in those activities, if you click in each one of the activities, it'll bring you up to the actual document itself with everything that you need to know about that particular materials, grade level, and stuff like that. Thank you for asking that question.
yeah, thanks for going over it.
So, okay. So just a couple of tips here before you go. So I was just showing you guys this experiment. All of our experiments kind of look the same. We kind of go through what basically the scope is. What's the challenge? What are we talking about here? It talks about the grade level, how much the duration can be. And so as you know, the duration, it can be as quick as you want it to be, or as fast or as slow as you want it to be. It'll tell you some of the materials, what's required for the setup. It goes through the activity itself, and then it gives you some ideas on how to make it harder or how to make it less harder. My point is and also here at the top, it'll tell you kind of what the recommended grades are and what the recommended duration is, just as a quick and dirty. And my recommendation is that you read the entire experiment front to back and back to front, kind of how our moms used to tell us when we used to prepare for a test, because those kids, once you show up, they're sharks. They're going to ask you a lot of questions. So it really read through it before you go. And even before you even talk to the teacher. So most likely you would have already contacted the teacher. So kind of building up with what Jennifer and Karen were saying. Once you reach out and you decide what the type of activity or who you'll be talking to, have a conversation with the teacher, because not every class is alike. Some classes need some work more on certain things, and in other classes they have a more challenging group, um, as in they like to be challenged more. It also depends on the school year, where they are within the school years. Do they know how to do tables, etc.? Do they know the scientific method? So you need to really kind of understand not only the project itself, but who you will be presenting to and talking to while doing this activity. So as I was mentioning, that first, in the previous slide, that was the first sheet. This is the second sheet. As I was mentioning, they'll tell you, we'll go through level of difficulty. What are some things that you can do to increase the difficulty or to decrease difficulty? How will you know that? Because you would have talked to the teacher or whomever the group leader is, to kind of tell you where those students are within their learning. So can they handle things like making their own tables, or would you have to kind of create a table for their observations before? We also, and this is where I really kind of want people to kind of focus on, we also kind of talk about the for discussion. We have that portion in there, and that paragraph right there is very important, because this is what can extend your time and can really give a lot of bang for their buck for the teacher, because this is when you start kind of talking to the students and having them join A and B together and get into a healthy discussion about whatever it is that you're presenting on. Any questions thus far? Nope. Okay. All right. So, what makes a good STEM lesson? So, if you're in the elementary group, you've probably heard about Minecraft, and you've probably heard or have children that watch Preston. How do we make a STEM lesson really engaging when we have Preston to compete with and Minecraft to compete with? Well, stay cool. Kids absolutely love to get their hands dirty and mix things together, make things happen, especially when it comes to cars. I've learned a lot that kids love to experiment with, like, different roadways and materials, and how can the roadways be different. As long as they're engaged, and they're getting their hands dirty, so to speak, they will be very interested. So, what are some of the things that you need to make sure? What are the best practices from that? So, the best practice is to make sure that it's a balance. So, if it's too educational, they just won't pay attention. But if it's too YouTubey, too fun, too Minecraft looking, then it's not going to be a good STEM lesson either. So you've got to be able to balance that and say, okay, well, we want to make sure we incorporate a little bit of science. Can we incorporate some technology aspects of it? So speak their language. If you know that they're very, in the case of Minecraft, they're very interested in Minecraft. Is there something that maybe you can bring that into the discussion of whatever the activity you're doing? What are some of the engineering and math aspects of it? So I always love to kind of talk to them a lot about the scientific method. So What do you think is going to happen? And they usually say, well, I think da 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 is going to happen. And then I go, okay, so is that your hypotheses? And they'll usually have this confused face of hypo what? And so I go, that's what a hypothesis is. It's something that you think about that it's going to happen. And then you try to see if it happens or if it doesn't. It's part of the scientific method. And they go, oh, and then they think it's really cool that they did whatever that long word is. So it doesn't have to be complicated, but if we balance out and touch in every single one of those letters, it definitely is the good base of a good STEM lesson. So, what are some real world applications? How can you make that realistic and relatable? So, in the project that I was showing you guys earlier, you probably saw some of those ramps. And so, let me just kind of go back to it a little bit. So, I actually did this with my son's class, and you can see how we had some wooden ramps, and in some cases, we had the ramps um, just the pure wood. In other cases, we had cotton around it. In other times, we had construction paper or sandpaper. Then we also had cars, and that was the biggest interest there. And so when we talked about real world applications, they kind of saw how there was a big truck versus a smaller lower car, and those usually traveled longer along the ramps. And so they all started talking about, oh, well, that makes sense because I've seen this Tesla car that goes very, very fast in comparison to my daddy's truck. um, and so kind of talking to them about the real world applications really, really helps them further understand what we're kind of talking about. In that particular example, in another classroom, also there was a fan that was introduced to the side of it, and some of the cars kind of flew out. And so that's always fun, especially in places where you have hurricane force winds or tornadoes or things like that. That's why you kind of tell them, well, that's why we have to seek shelter when some of those natural disasters occur. So teamwork. It's best if you can kind of divide up the classroom into different teams. And it's really cool, actually, because kids love to talk amongst themselves, and they'll start kind of collaborating and saying, like, okay, so what happens if I do this? And what happens if we add this? Or, excuse me, what can I do to make this happen? And so, kind of walking around these groups also kind of helps out a lot. Sometimes some groups have leaders within them, and you can see that they're collaborating very well. And some other groups don't. And so, those are the groups that we need to make sure that we go to and kind of start asking them the question, kind of like in the example project here, kind of asking, hey, have you tried to put some sandpaper around the wooden ramp? What's going to happen with your car? Have you tried to use a truck versus a smaller car? Hey, I wonder if you would put an airplane on here. What do you think would happen? And see kind of what they say. And then multiple answers, right? So collaboration, which requires contribution, and collaboration leads to solutions. So that's the beauty of being in STEM. That's the beauty of me being an engineer. There's no right way to do it. We've probably all heard that saying, there's a million ways to skin a cat. And so that kind of driving that is very important, because as engineers, we always like to work as a team and trying to find the best answer possible. Any questions or comments on that? All right, so some other tips and tricks that can help your outreach be a little bit better. So, number one, work with your community leaders to get your materials / volunteers. So you can reach out to local companies. Engineering companies are always looking to do something positive with the community. Contractors, the MPOs usually have some outreach for, especially for elementary children. trying to shape up people, they usually have those things in mind. Sometimes they have stuff on hand that they can share with you. Um, that can help you kind of get those materials that are needed. Some materials are some projects have materials where the teachers would have some of them, but some of them did not. In the case of the project that I was just showcasing, all of the wood was donated by a local contracting firm. And the cool thing about that is that those materials were then left in the school. So long after we left, the school has kept doing the same experiment, as they get new classes, etc. ITE local chapters, public agencies, your cities, your counties also, they normally have some stuff. In particular, some cities, I've done some STEM projects with cities and research facilities that have had signing and striping materials. And then you bring a telescope and they can see a microscope, sorry, not a telescope, microscope, and you can actually see some of the material and how it works, and what are the colors of the signs, and striping, what do they mean, why does a crossing guard hold a stop sign, and what does yellow mean, and what does white mean, what does orange mean, what does brown mean, things like that. So that's always awesome. Local ITE chapters also, sometimes they have local funds that can be used for this type of an outreach, especially during STEM month or Innovate Day, or just whenever they want to just do some community outreach. So those are always kind of people that you can do that with. Obviously some STEM advocacy groups. However, I will say that STEM advocacy groups, sometimes they have their own established way of doing things. And so you can reach out to them and see if they're open to doing some of these transportation type activities, and usually they'll be good with it. They always like to have volunteers. Now, be forewarned, as a volunteer, when you go to a school, there's usually a background check that needs to happen. And so I say this because we learned this the hard way. We showed up the day of, and anybody who hasn't done the background check won't be allowed inside of the school. So just check whoever you're doing your work with to see if that's needed to gain access into the buildings. So as I was saying, try to secure materials that can be used time and time again. That way, it's very helpful for the schools, in particular for places that don't really have a lot of funds to secure materials. Use social media to your advantage. We live in a social media world. So if you're looking for volunteers, if you want more people to show up, use LinkedIn, use Facebook. We're constantly posting stuff into our LinkedIn page, and that's shareable to people. And then during your activity and after your activity, it's equally important to post about that so that you get more and more awareness. And who knows, maybe next time you'll have a different contractor or public agency that will want to help out. Like, hey, I noticed that you were working on this last year. I'd like to be able to help out with this, et cetera, et cetera. Also, and this is very important, share your lessons learned. So we've been doing this for, I think, I want to say about 3 years now. And every year we kind of learn something new, like the background check thing was a biggie that we learned within the first 6 months of us doing this type of outreach. So share your lessons learned with us. If you're running into roadblocks, or if you have any great ideas, we're always looking for help with that. So don't be a stranger. Just let us know. Any questions or comments or lessons learned? Dang, you guys are a rough group. Quiet group. Okay. All right.
Debbie, actually, I do have a couple of questions. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Yes. So I'm looking into possibly doing some of this to some homeschoolers. So the whole coordinating with the teacher and background check and all that may not be applicable. I wanted to know, based on the current situation with COVID and maybe not even going to schools or having people gather, has anybody been successful in doing this virtually?
So that is a great question. And we actually started asking some input on this because, as you can imagine, engaging elementary students via Zoom is very, very hard unless your name is Preston and you happen to play Minecraft for for a living. Um, and one of the things that I just reached out to a couple of teachers that we normally work with, just as we continue to shape these and share lessons learned. The more cool stuff you can do on screen as interactive, the better. And so there's of course, we're not chemical engineers, but there's, like the volcano exploding kind of thing that everybody likes to see. So in my case, if I was doing this ramp project, I'd probably have two cars crashing into each other and make a pretty loud noise when that happens, just to kind of get their attention. And then they're like, okay, I wonder when she changed this. And then they're actually really good at raising their hand and waiting their turn. And so they can raise their hand, wait their turn, and say, okay, can you test this out? And then you test it out for them. And you have them kind of write down the observations. It takes a little bit more coordination within the COVID world to be able to do that. And the jury's still out in the grand scheme of things from that perspective. But that's kind of the best that we've come up with. The second option is pre-preparing bags that can be picked up by somebody or left or dropped off to a certain school. So in the case of the school of my kids, we dropped off all the materials at the school, and then they had it there for each kid to use, or each team to use at their advantage. And so it takes a little bit more preparation, as you can imagine, within the COVID world, but it can be done and engaging.
Okay, that sounds encouraging, because I was thinking the same thing, where if you had the course or I've done some of my own research, so I found some STEM type activities from FHWA's website, but of course I go on that frequently. So now I've seen there's quite a bit more on the ITE's website. So if you're prepared and you have the course or the program and the materials, yes, you can get those to the students ahead of time. And then if you're actually conducting it via Zoom or virtually, so they'll have the materials, and I guess you're going to kind of have to be guiding them along the way. But I was also thinking maybe incorporating videos that you can have them watch as well. So it may be a little bit more cumbersome than being there in person with the students conducting different activities that they may undertake. It does seem like it's possible.
Yeah, and Joseph, I think that it also depends on your audience. Are we talking about kindergartners, or are we talking about fifth graders, right? And so
good question.
It goes, it's pretty big. I will tell you, my fourth grader, oh my gosh, she was like born knowing PowerPoint. She blows my mind. I do PowerPoints almost weekly. This PowerPoint that I'm showing you, she would laugh at this PowerPoint. She's
wow.
like, this isn't interactive. This isn't, like she writes script on stuff like that. So it just depends on the client. Because I was amazed, I was really, really amazed as I started kind of asking, right? And then do they have iPads, or do they have laptops? My kindergartner goes to the same school as my first grader. He's a baby still in my mind, but my first grader is not at the same level as my fourth grader, right? So he can't do a PowerPoint presentation. However, he knows how to navigate through a lot of video stuff. And so it just depends on who you're talking about and what their level of understanding is. Um, and how to make it difficult or less difficult. So I'm just going to keep talking about this one project of the ramps because they were learning about friction. They're currently right now learning about friction in the school system where I live. And with that, the fourth graders start learning also about kinetic energy and other forms of energy that can be affected by friction. My son is only learning something makes this stop, which is called friction. It's a force, and it just makes it stop. So if I were talking to his classroom, I would focus more on, hey, we have all of these materials. Guys, tell me which one you want to use, and raise up your hand if you want this cotton, around the ramps. And then you'll see they will put their hands up on their Zoom. Okay, and then raise your hand if you want the sandpaper. Raise your hand if you want this towel. Raise your hand if you don't want anything. All right, and then you say, okay, now we're going to make these race. I'm gonna put this one with the towel and this one without. Let's see if they crash. Who gets there first? And then you'll hear them say, now, of course, then you got to make like a big crashing sound and stuff like that. But that's different than, say, my daughter's classroom, because that you can make them do some things, right? So you can deliver the materials to them and say, like, all right, so we've got this friction thing that happened, but a tornado came into town, or rain happened. Show me what's going to happen with the materials you have. And then you kind of see them kind of thinking about it and doing it, and really being engaged about it, as opposed to them telling you, if that makes sense.
So one more quick question. I hope it's beneficial to all. So in the case of maybe grouping, because in homeschool it's a little different, but I'm feeling like I could do something that would include maybe 5th, 6th, 7th, towards the end of elementary school and the beginning of middle school. It seems like there's activities listed here that are under elementary and under middle, but it seems like if you tailored it the right way, it would work for both groups at the same time. You wouldn't have to separate them.
Yeah, so what I would say is, if you're going to choose one of the elementary ones, go specifically to making it more difficult. And, especially if you're going to go up, because if it's too easy, they won't be engaged either. So it's gotta be somewhat easy. And in your case, it's all about these apps. They have this app called Menti, MENTI. And you can ask them a question. That's how they get a pop quiz in the schools, in middle school. I've seen it in school. I was like, wow, because when I was in school, we didn't have cell phones in school, but you couldn't bring like electronics to school. And now with your phone, you answer the pop quiz. And it doesn't matter who answered the quiz. If the class all gets it right, then they can move on. So it's unanimous, I've seen it. It's pretty cool. So you could maybe incorporate some of that as well. I don't know if anybody here has had any success or has any other ideas for Joseph.
How did you spell that app name again?
Menti, MENTI.
TI. Okay.
T as in Tom.
Yep. Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great way. Yeah, that's a great way to get all the people engaged. Like as they type, you can ask for careers and or what people do, or I guess kids do at home. It starts populating and sort of groups things as well.
Yeah, if you YouTube Menti tutorial, it'll tell you, like, the very first one that pops up is getting the class involved. It's just a great way of involving them, So, but again, it's more, Joseph, it's more for your age group, more so than say a kindergartner, right? Because they'll be like, what? I don't even know how to spell Menti.
Yeah, I was thinking that, if you chose something from the middle school activities that, a fifth grader could certainly, and probably benefit from that activity, as opposed to selecting one. But I'm trying to consider doing something more safety related. What I saw on FHWA's website and what I'm seeing here on the ITE website, that that's been my focus most recently. And it seems to me, in talking to our police department and other professionals, and what I'm learning is we've kind of skipped a little bit of the safety training or education component when kids are smaller. So, it's a little harder to catch up and get them engaged when they're older. Next thing you know, they're driving cars. So anyway.
Joseph, I'm so happy that you brought that up. I think 2 years ago, ITE Austin, 2019, we had a STEM workshop, and one of them was educating them on why signs are a certain color. Till this day, when I took my daughter, and till this day, when she sees a brown sign for like a recreational park, she's like, oh, that's a park. That's not a warning sign, mommy. Oh, that's a regulatory sign. Oh, that's a warning sign, because they didn't know. And if I really think about it, nobody told me why the signs were yellow or orange, and what does the orange mean? And why is the stop sign red? Why did we choose red? Why not blue? What's the material made out of? Sometimes in the street, we can see at night the striping, and sometimes we can't. What is in that striping that we want? And is it the same material that's in our retroreflective signs? And so teaching them that was a big safety push from us. And I'm very thankful for Melissa. She was here. She's in I think she's in the high school breakout room, but she works for a research agency called TTI, and she brought a lot of the retroreflective material, and the kids got to see that under the microscope and see the prisms and see the difference between what is on the actual reflective markers in the pavement versus what's in the signs. Why is it a certain color? If you go the wrong way, you're going to see these red dots. What does that mean? Nobody tells you that, right? Nobody tells you that. And so that's a great safety kind of class. If you can score the materials for that, because then, especially if they're homeschooled, you can have those delivered. You just need to tell them, please don't stick it on the floor, because once it's stuck, it's stuck. Nothing's going to remove it.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. I actually do work for the city here in Florida, so I may have some access. But I had my wife and my daughter, my stepdaughter, attend one of a presentation at the ITE summer meeting, and the gentleman that spoke afterwards spoke about retroreflectivity, and they really learned a lot from that. And so that's another one I saw here. So it looks like there's just so many cool things that I can pick from and just work, and it may just lead from one topic to another topic, and be maybe a 1, 2, 3, 4 part thing that we could do. So I'm excited about it. Thank you.
No, thank you for participating and asking all the questions and being here. That's step one, and so, and as I mentioned, we're growing as we go. Joseph, if you come up with like another project, please let us know. We can post it onto this website. We're always looking for projects, always calling for them. It all started with first organizing it, and then we all had to kind of come together and think about it. That's the cool thing about engineering. And I always end every single one of our activities with this. Here's the thing about engineers. We don't know all the answers, but we're hired to try to find a solution. We always know what the problem is. We can identify what the problem is, which is half of the battle. But we are entrusted in, figuring things out, and I kind of talk to them in like bigger things. Like, imagine the very first engineer that had to deal with a car on a roadway, or the day an airplane came out. Engineers had to put the rocket up in the moon. These are things that we don't know. Nobody knew what was going to happen from that. Nobody knew if you pressed the brake, it was actually going to work. So engineers just keep doing the scientific method and improving and improving and improving, but we have to find solutions. And I kind of tell them that, because that's where the curiosity kind of starts, and in getting them engaged in considering a career in STEM. So
I guess I've been listening along, and I've done a good amount of STEM outreach and everything. But I guess just to share from my personal experience, I think I was the victim of bad outreach a lot of my childhood, until finally, it wasn't until my high school that I finally found out what civil engineering was, and I relearned kind of what engineering was, because it was sold to me in like a very I would say like inaccurate way. So personally, I grew up in an area where the only engineers were pretty much like mechanical for washing machines and dryers.
Yeah.
And kind of like the way that you're saying, Gabby, how it was like, okay, you're taking on the scientific method and you're an inventor. And so this idea that I was going to have to come up with a new appliance for household, like houses and everything like that, I was like, wow, I could never do that. Like, that was just something that I could never do. Or they would kind of paint it with all these adjectives, and I was like, oh, that's just not for me. And so at a career day or anything like that, I was really pushed off from the idea of engineer. So I would say just kind of like being aware of how it is being sold. And because honestly, do I ever use the scientific method when I'm designing the geometrics of a roadway? Like, no, I really don't. So there's a lot of the things that we do as engineers. We look at manuals that have already been researched heavily, and at TRB they come up. They do all these different reports. So I think that's someone else had brought it up, of this career connection, and I think that's a big component of. I think sometimes we can talk about engineering as this like lofty, ideologized, sort of thing. But really, at the end of the day, it's like, I think it's nice to meet like an actual person, and like, what do you like actually do? And so once I had gotten the opportunity in high school with the DOT to really finally meet somebody who actually does this, and I got a chance to job shadow, I was like, oh, I love this. Like, I could do this. Like, this is like, what is this called? This is called engineering. Like, that's not what I've been told in 6th grade and in 4th grade and in kindergarten. And so I guess any thoughts on that? Or
Thank you, Ellen. And we have about 40 seconds. I'll be as quick as possible. I agree with you. It's knowing your audience and speaking to that audience. I think that also as engineers, we tend to think of the scientific method as like the science project or something like that. But even as a designer, what happens if you design this way or design that way? And what are the repercussions of that, and what are the observations that you can kind of deduce from that? But absolutely, trying to bring that real aspect to it is very important, for sure.
Room leaders for leading the various breakouts. Really appreciate it. Hope you had valuable conversations. I know I definitely did in my room. So